The young widow's tears sparkled in the harsh Montana sunlight as she laid wildflowers on the freshly turned earth, her third miscarriage in as many years, and the whispers in Silverwood were growing louder with each tiny grave. Beatrice Blackwell dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief that had once belonged to her mother, the delicate lace edges now frayed from constant use. The cemetery sat on a gentle slope overlooking the town of Silverwood, Montana Territory, 1876. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of sage and dust from the main street below. At 26, Beatrice had already endured more heartache than most women twice her age, Mrs. Blackwell. The voice came from behind her, thin and reedy with feigned sympathy. "Such a shame to see you here again." Beatrice didn't need to turn to recognize Gertrude Walsh's voice, the shopkeeper's wife whose tongue was sharper than any knife in her husband's store. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Walsh," Beatrice replied softly, her eyes still fixed on the small mound before her. Gertrude moved closer, her shadow falling across the grave. "I was just saying to the ladies at the quilting circle that perhaps it's the Lord's way of telling you something. Not everyone is meant to be a mother, after all." Beatrice's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, Mrs. Walsh. Good day to you." As she rose and turned to leave, Gertrude's parting words stabbed at her heart. "That cradle of yours will remain empty, mark my words. Best you accept it and find other ways to make yourself useful." Beatrice walked down the path toward town, her back straight despite the weight bearing down on her shoulders. 2 years ago, she had buried her husband Thomas alongside the first child they'd lost. Influenza had taken them both within days of each other, leaving her alone with nothing but the small boarding house they'd built together and dreams that seemed to crumble with each passing season. The main street of Silverwood bustled with the usual afternoon activity. The newly constructed rail depot had brought a steady stream of travelers through town, many staying at Beatrice's establishment, the Silverwood Lodge. It wasn't much, just 6 rooms above a small dining area, but it was clean, and her cooking had earned a reputation that stretched beyond the town's borders. As Beatrice approached the lodge, she noticed a stranger leaning against the hitching post out front. Tall and lean, with the unmistakable posture of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, but she could see the dust of the trail covering his denim pants and leather vest. Mrs. Blackwell. The man straightened as she approached, removing his hat to reveal sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. "Name's Caleb Garrison. Was told in town you might have a room available." Beatrice nodded, retrieving her professional demeanor like a shield. "I do have a room, Mr. Garrison. $2 a night, includes breakfast and supper." "That's fair." He reached into his pocket and produced the coins. "I'll be needing it for at least a week, maybe longer." Caleb Garrison followed her into the lodge, his spurs jingling softly with each step. The main room was simple but welcoming, with a large hearth, several tables and chairs arranged for dining. A staircase along the back wall led to the guest rooms above. "You passing through or here on business, Mr. Garrison?" Beatrice asked as she retrieved the ledger from behind the small front desk. "Little of both." He signed his name in a surprisingly elegant script. "I've purchased the old Miller place about 3 miles out, planning to raise horses." Beatrice's eyebrows rose slightly. The Miller ranch had been abandoned for nearly 2 years after old Sam Miller died without an heir. The place had fallen into disrepair, with most of the fencing down and the barn roof partially collapsed. "That's quite an undertaking, Mr. Garrison." He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "I've never been one to shy away from hard work, Mrs. Blackwell, and please call me Caleb." "Very well, Caleb, I'm Beatrice." She handed him a key. "Room 3, top of the stairs and to your right, supper's at 6. As he climbed the stairs, Beatrice couldn't help but notice the easy grace of his movements, like a mountain lion, powerful yet controlled. She pushed the thought away and busied herself preparing the evening meal for her guests. Word of the new arrival spread quickly through Silverwood. By supper time, the dining room was unusually full with townsfolk who'd invented reasons to visit the lodge. Sheriff Tom Patterson, the town's aging lawman, made a point of introducing himself to Caleb, who answered his questions with straightforward politeness that seemed to satisfy the lawman. "Heard you bought the Miller place," the sheriff commented, spooning Beatrice's venison stew into his mouth. "Planning on staying a while then? That's the plan," Caleb replied. "Spent too many years drifting. Time to put down some roots." From her place behind the serving counter, Beatrice observed the newcomer. Unlike many of the men who passed through town, he ate with good manners, complimenting her cooking with genuine appreciation rather than the crude remarks she'd grown accustomed to deflecting. As the evening progressed and the other diners departed, Caleb remained at his table, nursing a cup of coffee. When Beatrice began collecting the dirty dishes, he stood to help. "Please sit," she protested. "You're a guest." "My mother would haunt me from the grave if I sat idle while a lady worked," he replied, gathering plates with efficient movements. "Besides, I've been in the saddle for 2 weeks. Feels good to move around." Together, they cleared the tables in companionable silence. As they worked, Beatrice felt the knot of grief that had tightened in her chest that morning begin to loosen ever so slightly. "I noticed the small cemetery on the hill," Caleb said as he dried the last plate. "Peaceful spot." Beatrice's hands stilled in the wash basin. "Yes, it is." Something in her tone made him look up, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected understanding. "I've left too many graves behind me, Mrs. Blackwell. Some days the weight of them feels impossible to carry." The simple statement, offered without pity or expectation, broke through Beatrice's carefully constructed defenses. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. "I'm sorry," she said, quickly wiping it away. "It's been a difficult day," Caleb nodded, setting down the dish towel. "No need for apologies, we all have our burdens." He moved toward the stairs, then paused. "Thank you for the meal, Mrs. Blackwell, best I've had in years." After he'd gone, Beatrice found herself standing in the empty dining room, the stranger's words echoing in her mind. She felt oddly seen for the first time since Thomas had died, not as the pitiful widow or the barren woman, but simply as a human being carrying a heavy load. Dawn broke with the promise of a scorching summer day. Beatrice rose early as always, stoking the kitchen fire and preparing breakfast for her guests. She was kneading dough for biscuits when Caleb appeared, already dressed for the day's work in a faded blue shirt and sturdy denims. "Morning," he greeted her, the scent of soap and leather accompanying him. "Mind if I take breakfast early? Thought I'd get out to the ranch and start assessing what needs doing." "Of course." Beatrice wiped her hands on her apron and quickly fixed him a plate of eggs and bacon. "Coffee's fresh." He ate with the efficiency of a man accustomed to making the most of daylight hours. "I may be back late tonight. Don't hold supper on my account." "I'll keep a plate warm," she replied, surprised by her own offer. Normally, her guests knew the rules. Meals were served at specific times and latecomers fended for themselves. Caleb seemed to notice the exception as well, his eyes warming with appreciation. "That's mighty kind of you." For the next several days, the pattern continued. Caleb would leave at first light, returning well after sunset, exhaustion evident in the set of his shoulders but determination still burning in his eyes. Each night, Beatrice would have a plate waiting, and they would talk briefly about his progress at the ranch. On the 5th night, as a thunderstorm lashed the town with rain and wind, Caleb returned soaked to the skin, a gash across his forehead crusted with blood. "Good heavens," Beatrice exclaimed, ushering him into the kitchen where the stove kept the room warm. "What happened?" "Roof beam gave way," he explained, wincing as she guided him to a chair. "Nothing serious." Beatrice fetched her medical supplies, a habit formed during her marriage to Thomas, who had often returned from his carpentry work with various injuries. With gentle hands, she cleaned the wound, her face close to his as she worked. "You should see a proper doctor," she murmured, applying a salve of her own making. "Had worse treated by less capable hands," Caleb replied, his voice low. "Your touch is healing enough." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them, a current of understanding that transcended mere words. Beatrice stepped back, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their proximity. "Your supper's keeping warm," she said, turning to the stove. "Thank you." Caleb touched the bandage she'd applied. For everything. The next morning, Beatrice was hanging laundry in the small yard behind the lodge when Gertrude Walsh appeared, her face pinched with disapproval. "Beatrice," she greeted with a tight smile, "I see your cowboy's still in residence." "Mr. Garrison is a paying guest, Gertrude, nothing more." Beatrice pinned a sheet to the line with more force than necessary. "That's not what I hear." Gertrude lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Martha Mason saw him coming from your kitchen well after midnight, looking quite comfortable." Beatrice's cheeks burned with indignation. "He was injured. I treated his wound and provided the meal he paid for as I would for any guest." Gertrude's eyebrows rose. "Of course, still a widow alone with a strange man. People talk, Beatrice, and you know how rumors spread in a small town." "Is there something you needed, Gertrude?" Beatrice asked pointedly, just delivering a friendly warning. The older woman adjusted her shawl. "The Ladies' Aid Society meets tomorrow to plan the Founders' Day celebration. We expect your contribution, as usual. I'll provide pies, as always." "Good." Gertrude's eyes drifted to the small cabin behind the lodge where Beatrice kept her personal quarters. Through the window, the edge of an empty cradle was just visible. Such a shame, that beautiful cradle going to waste. Thomas made it with such care. The barb struck its intended target, but Beatrice refused to give Gertrude the satisfaction of seeing her pain. "Good day, Gertrude." As the woman departed, Beatrice sagged against the clothesline post, the familiar ache blooming in her chest. The cradle had been Thomas's last gift to her, lovingly crafted during her second pregnancy. He died before their child, a tiny girl, had drawn her first breath. "Don't let her words poison you." The voice startled her. Caleb stood at the corner of the house, his expression grim. "Women like that feed on others' pain. How long have you been there?" Beatrice asked, embarrassment coloring her voice. "Long enough." He stepped forward, stopping a respectful distance away. "I apologize for eavesdropping, but I didn't want to interrupt and give her more ammunition." Beatrice nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Gertrude Walsh has appointed herself Silverwood's moral guardian. Unfortunately, her favorite target seems to be me." "Why?" The simple question carried genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Beatrice hesitated, then decided that honesty was simpler than evasion. "I've lost 3 babies and a husband in the span of 2 years. In Gertrude's view, that makes me either cursed or morally deficient. Either way, she considers me an appropriate object of pity and gossip." Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "I'm sorry for your losses, Beatrice. No one deserves such grief." "Thank you," she replied, surprised by how much his simple acknowledgement meant to her. An awkward silence stretched between them, broken when Caleb cleared his throat. "I came to let you know I'll be heading into town for supplies. Is there anything you need?" The mundane question was a welcome respite from emotional intensity. Beatrice considered for a moment. "Actually, yes. If you're going to Patterson's General Store, I could use 20 pounds of flour and some coffee beans." "Consider it done." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Beatrice, don't give that woman space in your head. She isn't worth it." As Caleb rode into town, his thoughts remained with Beatrice. In the week since he'd arrived in Silverwood, he'd observed her quiet strength, the dignity with which she carried her grief, and the kindness she extended to everyone despite the cruel whispers that followed her. Patterson's General Store bustled with the usual midday crowd. Caleb handed his list to the clerk and waited while the items were gathered. As he stood near the back of the store, he overheard a conversation between 2 women examining fabric bolts. "Poor Beatrice," said one, a plump woman in her 40s. "Did you hear about the latest incident at the cemetery?" Gertrude Walsh caught her weeping over that tiny grave again. "It's been 2 months since she lost the last one," replied her companion, clicking her tongue. "Time she accepted God's will and moved on. That empty cradle of hers is becoming a town joke." "Perhaps we should suggest she donate it to the church charity," the first woman said. "No sense keeping a reminder of what she'll never have." Caleb's hands clenched at his sides, anger rising in his throat. Before he could interject, Sheriff Patterson's voice cut through the gossip. "Ladies," the lawman said, his tone deceptively mild, I believe Mrs. Blackwell's personal matters are her own business. And last I checked, Christian charity didn't include cruel gossip. The women had the decency to look ashamed, mumbling apologies before moving to another part of the store. The sheriff caught Caleb's eye and nodded slightly, acknowledging the shared moment. Folks in small towns sometimes forget their manners, Patterson said as Caleb collected his purchases. Beatrice deserves better. Yes, she does, Caleb agreed, paying for his goods and Beatrice's requested items. As he loaded the supplies onto his horse, a plan began to form in Caleb's mind. He made one more stop before returning to the lodge, visiting the town's lumberyard, where he purchased a substantial amount of materials to be delivered to the Miller Ranch the following day. That evening, as Beatrice served dinner to her guests, she noticed a change in Caleb. The weariness that had marked his features in previous days had been replaced by a sense of purpose, an energy that seemed to radiate from within. "You seem different tonight," she commented as they cleaned up after the other guests had retired. "Got a lot done today," he replied enigmatically. "Beatrice, would you have time to ride out to the ranch tomorrow? I'd value your opinion on some of my plans." Surprised by the invitation, she hesitated. "I don't know, I have guests to attend to." "Just for the morning," he pressed. "Mrs. Foster mentioned she'd be happy to watch things for you." "Said you haven't taken a morning off in over a year." Beatrice's eyebrows rose. "You've been discussing me with my guests." Caleb had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Not exactly. Mrs. Foster volunteered the information when she saw me saddling an extra horse this afternoon." "You seem very confident I'll accept your invitation, Mr. Garrison," Beatrice said, unable to keep a small smile from her lips. "Hope springs eternal," he replied with a grin that transformed his weathered face. "Besides, I make excellent trail coffee." Against her better judgment, Beatrice found herself agreeing. The prospect of escaping town and the watchful eyes that seemed to follow her every movement was too tempting to resist. The following morning dawned clear and mild, a perfect day for riding. Beatrice donned her riding skirt, a garment that hadn't seen use since Thomas's death, and was surprised to find it slightly loose around her waist. The realization that she'd grown thin from overwork and grief was sobering. Caleb waited with two horses, one a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze down her nose. "This is Daisy," he said, helping Beatrice mount. "Steadiest horse I've ever known." The ride to the Miller Ranch took them through rolling hills covered with late summer wildflowers. Beatrice found herself relaxing as they traveled, the tension that had become her constant companion gradually easing from her shoulders. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it is out here," she admitted as they crested a rise that offered a panoramic view of the valley. "Easy to lose sight of beauty when you're carrying heavy burdens," Caleb replied, his eyes on the horizon. "This land reminds me there's always something worth fighting for." As they approached the Miller property, Beatrice was surprised by the transformation that had already taken place. The fallen fences had been repaired, the yard cleared of debris, and the barn roof partially reconstructed. A stack of fresh lumber sat near the house, alongside various building materials. "You've been busy," she remarked as they dismounted. "I'm impressed." "Just getting started," Caleb replied, leading her toward the house. "Come see inside." The interior of the ranch house was simple but solid, two main rooms downstairs and what appeared to be sleeping quarters in a loft above. Caleb had clearly been cleaning as the floors were swept and the windows washed, allowing sunlight to stream in. "It's a good house," Beatrice said, running her hand along the sturdy pine table that dominated the main room. "Needs some feminine touches, but the bones are strong." "That's what I thought." Caleb unrolled several sheets of paper on the table, detailed drawings showing additions to the house and property. "I'm planning to expand, add 2 more rooms here, enlarge the kitchen, build a proper porch across the front." Beatrice studied the drawings with genuine interest. "You've put a lot of thought into this. For just one person, though, it seems quite large." Caleb's eyes met hers, something unreadable in their blue depths. "I'm hoping it won't be just for one person forever." The implications of his statement hung in the air between them. Beatrice looked away first, flustered by the intensity of his gaze. "Would you like to see what I've done with the barn?" he asked, breaking the tension. Grateful for the diversion, Beatrice followed him outside. The barn was a spacious structure, built to house numerous horses and store hay for the long Montana winters. Caleb had reinforced the foundation and replaced much of the roofing, though work clearly remained to be done. "I'll have 4 stalls here for breeding stock," he explained, pointing to partially constructed dividers. "And over here, I'm building a workshop." He led her to a corner of the barn where various woodworking tools were arranged neatly on a bench. Shavings covered the floor beneath an unfinished piece of furniture. "You're a carpenter?" Beatrice asked, surprised. "My father taught me. Wasn't much call for it during my years on the trail, but it's a skill I've kept sharp." Caleb ran his hand along the smooth pine of the piece he was constructing. "I find working with wood settles my mind." Beatrice nodded, understanding perfectly. Thomas was the same way. He said wood speaks to those who know how to listen. Sounds like a wise man. Caleb's voice was soft with respect. He was. Beatrice smiled at the memory. He could look at a piece of lumber and see the table or chair it was meant to be, as if it were already there, just waiting to be freed. As they continued the tour of the property, Caleb pointed out his plans where he would plant a vegetable garden, the orchard he hoped to start, the spring-fed pond he intended to expand for watering livestock. His vision for the place was comprehensive and ambitious. "You plan to do all this yourself?" Beatrice asked as they sat on a fallen log near the pond, sharing the promised trail coffee and biscuits Caleb had packed. "For now," he replied. "Once I get the breeding operation established, I'll hire help, but the house, that's personal. I want to build it with my own hands." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "I mean, why this place? Why Silverwood?" Caleb was silent for a moment, his eyes on the rippling water of the pond. "I've been drifting for 10 years, taking whatever work came my way: ranch hand, trail guide, Army scout. Seen a lot of country, met a lot of people. But nowhere felt right until I crested that rise and saw this valley." "And you just knew?" Beatrice couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "Sometimes a place speaks to you," he said simply. "Like your husband's wood, this land said home to me the moment I laid eyes on it." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Beatrice, a longing she'd buried beneath grief and duty. "I understand," she said softly. "Thomas and I felt that way about Silverwood when we first arrived. We had such dreams." "Dreams can be rebuilt," Caleb said, his eyes meeting hers. "Different maybe, but no less worthy." The ride back to town was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the lodge, Beatrice became aware of curious glances from townsfolk. Her morning absence had clearly been noted. "Thank you for showing me your ranch," she said as Caleb helped her dismount. "It's going to be magnificent when you're finished." "You're welcome anytime," he replied, his hands lingering slightly as she slid from the saddle. "I mean that, Beatrice." Before she could respond, Gertrude Walsh appeared on the boardwalk, her expression a mixture of surprise and disapproval. "Beatrice, we missed you at the Ladies' Aid meeting this morning. I do hope nothing's amiss." Her eyes darted between Beatrice and Caleb, taking in the riding clothes and flushed cheeks. "Mr. Garrison was kind enough to show me the improvements he's making to the Miller Ranch," Beatrice explained, keeping her voice level. "It was a welcome change of scenery." "I'm sure it was," Gertrude replied, her tone implying far more than her words. "Well, I'll expect those pies for the celebration tomorrow, regardless of your diversions." As Gertrude swept away, Caleb stepped closer to Beatrice. That woman needs a hobby that doesn't involve tormenting her neighbors. Despite herself, Beatrice laughed, the sound surprising them both. "I can't remember the last time I laughed," she admitted. "Then I consider today a success," Caleb replied with a smile. "Laughter is good medicine for a wounded heart." Over the next few weeks, a subtle shift occurred in Beatrice's life. While Caleb continued to stay at the lodge, his days were spent at the ranch, often returning with small gifts, wildflowers gathered from the meadow, fresh berries from a bush he'd discovered. Once even a kitten he'd rescued from an abandoned barn. Now the lodge's unofficial greeter and mouse catcher. More significant were the changes in Beatrice herself. The burden of grief still weighed upon her, but it had become more bearable somehow. She found herself humming as she worked, looking forward to the evenings when she and Caleb would talk after the other guests had retired. The townsfolk noticed the transformation. Most were pleased to see life returning to the young widow's eyes, though Gertrude and her circle continued their disapproving whispers. Sheriff Patterson made a point of stopping by the lodge more frequently, his presence a silent message that Beatrice was under his protection. One evening in late August, as Beatrice was preparing to close the kitchen for the night, a commotion erupted in the dining room. She hurried in to find two trail-worn men looming over Mrs. Foster, one with his hand on the elderly woman's shoulder. "I said I want a drink, old woman," the taller of the two growled, "and then maybe some company for the night." His eyes slid to Beatrice as she entered. "Well now, here's a prettier option." Beatrice stiffened, recognizing the threat in the man's leering gaze. "Gentlemen, this is a respectable establishment. We don't serve alcohol, and the kind of company you're seeking isn't available here. I must ask you to leave." The shorter man laughed, a harsh sound that sent ice down Beatrice's spine. "Hear that, Jeb? The lady wants us to leave." "We ain't going nowhere," Jeb replied, taking a step toward Beatrice. "Not till we get what we came for." Mrs. Foster trembled, her aged face pale with fear. Beatrice stepped forward, placing herself between the men and the older woman. "I'll say it one more time. Leave now or I'll call the sheriff." Jeb reached out, his dirty fingers brushing Beatrice's cheek. "Sheriff's probably asleep by now. No one's coming to help you, pretty lady." "I wouldn't be so sure about that." The voice came from the doorway where Caleb stood, his stance relaxed but his eyes hard as flint. "The lady asked you to leave." Jeb turned, sizing up the newcomer. "This ain't your business, cowboy. I'm making it my business." Caleb stepped into the room, his movements measured. "You have two choices. Walk out that door on your own, or I'll throw you out. Either way, you're leaving." The shorter man reached for his gun, but Caleb was faster. A swift blow to the wrist sent the weapon clattering to the floor, followed by a punch that dropped the man where he stood. Jeb launched himself at Caleb with a roar, only to be met with a combination of strikes that left him gasping on his knees. Caleb retrieved both men's guns, emptying the chambers before tossing them aside. "Now, you're going to apologize to these ladies, and then you're going to leave town. If I see either of you again, our next conversation won't be so pleasant." Stunned by the speed and efficiency of Caleb's response, the would-be assailants mumbled apologies before stumbling out the door. Mrs. Foster collapsed into a chair, clutching her chest. "Are you hurt?" Beatrice asked, kneeling beside the older woman. "Just frightened, dear Mrs." Foster replied, patting Beatrice's hand, "If Mr. Garrison hadn't arrived when he did." "But he did," Beatrice said, looking up at Caleb with gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you," Caleb nodded, the hard edges of his demeanor softening. "I'll fetch the sheriff, make sure those two leave town." After Mrs. Foster had been settled in her room with a cup of chamomile tea, Beatrice found Caleb on the front porch of the lodge, staring out at the night sky. "Sheriff Patterson found our visitors at the saloon," he reported as she joined him. "They're spending the night in jail and leaving on tomorrow's train." "I'm grateful you came when you did," Beatrice said, standing beside him at the railing. "I don't want to think about what might have happened." "I was on my way back from the ranch and saw them enter. Something about them didn't sit right." Caleb turned to face her. "Are such incidents common here?" Beatrice shook her head. "No, Silverwood is generally peaceful. Occasionally, we get troublemakers passing through, but Sheriff Patterson usually deals with them before they cause problems." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of piano music from the saloon down the street. The warm summer night wrapped around them like a blanket, stars scattered across the velvet sky. "I've decided to move out to the ranch next week," Caleb said finally. "The house is livable now and I need to be closer to the work." Beatrice felt an unexpected pang at his words. "Of course. That makes sense. I'd like you to come see what I've done," he continued. "There's something I want to show you." "I'd like that," she replied, wondering at the earnest tone in his voice. The following Sunday, Beatrice closed the lodge for the afternoon, something she rarely did, and rode out to the Miller Ranch with Caleb. The transformation of the property in just a few short weeks was remarkable. The house now boasted a wide, welcoming porch, new shutters painted a cheerful blue, and flower boxes beneath the windows. "It's beautiful," she exclaimed as they dismounted. "You've worked miracles." "Wait till you see inside," Caleb replied, a hint of nervousness in his voice that Beatrice had never heard before. The interior had been equally transformed. Fresh plaster covered the walls, the floors had been sanded smooth, and simple but attractive furniture filled the main room, a table and chairs, a comfortable-looking settee near the stone fireplace, shelves lined with books. "Did you make all of this?" Beatrice asked, running her hand along the polished surface of the table. "Most of it," Caleb admitted. "I've always found peace in working with my hands." He led her through the house, showing her the expanded kitchen with its new cast iron stove, the pantry stocked with preserved goods, the bedrooms with their handcrafted bed frames. Everything spoke of care and attention to detail. "It's a home, not just a house," Beatrice said, feeling a wistful ache in her chest. "You should be proud, Caleb. There's one more thing I want to show you." He guided her to a room at the back of the house, his hand warm at the small of her back. "I've saved this for last." The room was smaller than the others, with a window that faced east to catch the morning sun. In the center stood a cradle, crafted of polished cherry wood with intricate carvings along its sides. Beside it was a rocking chair with a quilted cushion. Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. The cradle was similar to the one Thomas had made, yet distinctly different, unique in its craftsmanship and design. "I don't understand," she whispered, her fingers hovering over the smooth wood. "I overheard some talk in town," Caleb said, his voice low and earnest. "About your empty cradle and how it had become a symbol of mockery. It made me angry that people would take your pain and turn it into gossip." He moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring behind her. "I wanted to show you that cradles can be symbols of hope, not just reminders of loss. That dreams can be rebuilt, different but no less beautiful." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. Something warm and unfamiliar blossomed in her chest, a feeling she had thought forever lost to her. "Why are you doing this, Caleb?" she asked, turning to face him. "Why do you care?" His blue eyes held hers, unflinching and sincere. "Because from the moment I saw you in that cemetery, with your back straight despite the weight you were carrying, I knew you were the strongest person I'd ever met. Because you've faced heartbreak that would have destroyed most people, yet you still find it in yourself to show kindness to others." He took her hands in his touch gentle yet firm. "And because I've spent my life wandering, looking for something I couldn't name until I found you." "Home, Beatrice, you feel like home." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Beatrice felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble, stone by stone. "I'm broken, Caleb," she whispered. "I've lost so much, I don't know if I have anything left to give." "You're not broken," he countered. "Wounded, yes, scarred, certainly, but those scars are proof of your strength, not your weakness." He released her hands, stepping back slightly. "I'm not asking for promises, Beatrice. Just a chance to show you that there can be joy again, that your life isn't defined by what you've lost." Beatrice looked around the room, at the cradle built with such care, at the man who had created it without expectation or demand. She thought of the laughter she had rediscovered in his company, the gradual lightening of the grief that had become her constant companion. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid to hope, afraid to care again." "Fear is natural," Caleb said. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it." The truth of his words resonated within her. Slowly, deliberately, Beatrice closed the distance between them. Rising on her toes, she pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Thank you," she murmured. "For the cradle, for your kindness, for seeing me when I felt invisible." Caleb's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Does this mean you'll give us a chance?" "It means I'm willing to try," she replied, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "One day at a time." As autumn painted the Montana landscape in gold and crimson, Beatrice's life settled into a new rhythm. Caleb moved to his ranch but visited the lodge daily, often bringing small gifts or simply offering his company. They took rides together on his days off, explored the hills surrounding Silverwood, and slowly, the bond between them deepened. The town noticed, of course. Whispers followed Beatrice, but they had a different tone now, curiosity rather than pity, interest instead of judgment. Even Gertrude Walsh had become less vocal in her criticism, perhaps recognizing that public opinion had shifted. Sheriff Patterson made a point of stopping by the ranch one afternoon when he knew Caleb would be working alone. The two men shared coffee on the new porch, watching clouds gather over the distant mountains. "Beatrice seems happier these days," the sheriff observed, his weathered face unreadable. "I hope she is," Caleb replied, meeting the older man's gaze steadily. "She's been through hell, you know. Lost her husband and 3 babies in quick succession. This town wasn't always kind about it." Caleb nodded, his jaw tightening. "I've heard the whispers. Just want to make sure you understand what you're getting into," Patterson continued. "Beatrice is like a daughter to me. I won't stand by and see her hurt again." "Neither will I," Caleb said firmly. "My intentions are honorable, Sheriff. I care for her deeply." The lawman studied him for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good, that's good." As the first snow dusted the hills around Silverwood, Caleb invited Beatrice to dine at his ranch. He had prepared the meal himself: venison stew, fresh bread, and a berry cobbler that had taken 3 attempts to get right. The house was warm and inviting, with a fire crackling in the hearth and candles lending a soft glow to the table he had set with care. Beatrice arrived bundled against the cold, her cheeks flushed from the ride. "This is a lovely surprise," she said as he helped her remove her coat. "I didn't know you could cook." "There's a lot you don't know about me yet," he replied with a smile. "I'm hoping we'll have time to discover all of it together." They ate by candlelight, sharing stories of their childhoods. Beatrice's in a small town in Pennsylvania, Caleb's on a struggling farm in Texas. They spoke of dreams and disappointments, of the paths that had led them to this moment, sitting across from each other in a ranch house on the Montana frontier. After dinner, they moved to the settee near the fire, the comfortable silence between them broken only by the pop and crackle of burning logs. Outside, snow fell more heavily, blanketing the world in quiet white. "Beatrice," Caleb said finally, taking her hand in his. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. Being with you, seeing you smile again, watching you grow stronger each day, it's been a privilege." She squeezed his hand, warmth spreading through her at his words. "You've brought laughter back into my life when I thought it was gone forever. I'll always be grateful for that." "I don't want your gratitude," he said softly. "I want your future." Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden box exquisitely carved with a pattern of intertwining wildflowers. He placed it in her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. With trembling fingers, Beatrice opened the box. Inside lay a ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "It's not fancy," Caleb said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "But it was my mother's. She said pearls represent tears transformed into something beautiful, and I thought that seemed right for us." Beatrice stared at the ring, her heart pounding in her chest. "Caleb, are you asking you to marry me?" "Yes." He took both her hands in his. "I love you, Beatrice Blackwell. I love your strength and your kindness, your resilience and your tenderness. I love the way you hum when you're baking and the fierce protectiveness you show toward those in your care. I love everything about you, including the scars you carry." Tears filled Beatrice's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I never thought I would feel this way again," she whispered. "After Thomas died, I believed that part of me was gone forever. But you've awakened something I thought was dead." She took a deep breath, her voice growing stronger. "I love you too, Caleb Garrison. You've rebuilt more than this ranch. You've helped me rebuild my heart." He took the ring from its box and slipped it onto her finger, where it nestled as if it had always belonged there. Then he gathered her in his arms, his kiss a promise of all the days to come. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Silverwood. Most townsfolk offered sincere congratulations, pleased to see happiness return to Beatrice's life. A few, led by Gertrude Walsh, expressed concern about the hasty nature of the match, but their voices were largely ignored. Sheriff Patterson was among the first to congratulate them, his gruff exterior softening as he hugged Beatrice and shook Caleb's hand firmly. "About time," he said. "Town's been taking bets on when you'd make it official." The wedding was planned for Christmas Eve, a time of hope and new beginnings. Beatrice closed the lodge for 3 days, allowing her guests to join in the celebrations. The town's small church was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, candles illuminating the simple space with golden light. As Beatrice prepared in a small room at the back of the church, a knock sounded at the door. To her surprise, Gertrude Walsh entered, her usual stern expression replaced by something almost apologetic. "You look lovely, Beatrice," the older woman said, adjusting the white ribbon that secured Beatrice's veil. "Thank you, Gertrude," Beatrice replied cautiously. Gertrude hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "I owe you an apology. I've been unkind, judgmental. After I lost my own child many years ago, I hardened my heart. Seeing your grief reminded me of my pain, and instead of offering comfort, I lashed out." Stunned by the confession, Beatrice reached for the other woman's hand. "I never knew, Gertrude. I'm so sorry for your loss." "It was a long time ago," Gertrude replied, squeezing Beatrice's fingers briefly before releasing them. "But watching you find happiness again, it's helped me remember that life continues, even after great sorrow." With a small smile that transformed her pinched features, Gertrude reached into her reticule and withdrew a delicate handkerchief edged with lace. "Something borrowed," she said, pressing it into Beatrice's hand. "For good luck." The gesture, simple yet profound, brought tears to Beatrice's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. The ceremony itself was brief but beautiful. Sheriff Patterson walked Beatrice down the aisle, standing in for the father she had lost years before. "Mrs. Foster dabbed at her eyes throughout, while other townsfolk filled the church with warmth and goodwill. When Caleb saw Beatrice approaching in her ivory gown, a garment she had sewn herself during the long evenings of their courtship, his face transformed with a joy so pure it took her breath away. As they exchanged vows before the minister, Beatrice felt the final pieces of her broken heart mend, not erasing the past, but incorporating it into something new and stronger. The reception was held at the ranch, which had been decorated with evergreen boughs and paper snowflakes crafted by the town's children. A feast was spread on tables borrowed from the lodge, and music filled the air as neighbors and friends celebrated the union. Late in the evening, as the party continued around them, Caleb drew Beatrice aside, leading her to the small room at the back of the house where the cherrywood cradle still stood. "I have a wedding gift for you," he said, his voice low and intimate. From behind the rocking chair, he produced a small wooden box, similar to the one that had held her ring but larger. Beatrice opened it to find a hand-carved mobile, delicate wooden stars and moons suspended on thin leather cords. "It's beautiful," she murmured, running her fingers over the intricate designs. "For the cradle," Caleb explained. "Not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a symbol of what might be when we're ready. No rush, no pressure, just possibility." Tears sparkled in Beatrice's eyes as she hung the mobile above the empty cradle, the wooden shapes dancing gently in the air. "Thank you," she whispered, turning into her husband's embrace, "for understanding that hope and grief can exist side by side." "Always," he promised, holding her close. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The winter months passed in a blur of newlywed bliss and hard work. Beatrice continued to run the lodge, though she now spent nights at the ranch with Caleb. Together, they established a routine that balanced their responsibilities with time for each other. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, painting the Montana landscape with wildflowers and fresh green growth. The ranch flourished under their combined care. Caleb's breeding operation began to show promise, while Beatrice established a garden that would provide vegetables for both the ranch and the lodge. One evening in late April, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Beatrice turned to Caleb with a smile that held a secret. "I have news," she said, taking his hand and placing it over her still flat abdomen. We're going to need that cradle after all. Joy bloomed across Caleb's face, followed quickly by concern. Are you sure, after everything you've been through? I'm scared, she admitted. Terrified, actually, but Dr. Wilson says I'm healthy and he believes this time will be different. And even if it's not, she took a deep breath. Even if it's not, I want to try. With you beside me, I'm brave enough to hope again. Caleb gathered her into his arms, his touch both protective and reverent. We'll take it one day at a time, he promised. And whatever happens, we'll face it together. The pregnancy progressed without complication, each week that passed allowing Beatrice to breathe a little easier, to believe a little more firmly in the future growing within her. Caleb was attentive without being smothering, understanding her fears while encouraging her hope. When Gertrude Walsh organized a quilting circle to create a baby blanket for the expected child, the gesture of reconciliation and acceptance brought Beatrice to tears. The women of Silverwood, who had once whispered behind her back about her empty cradle, now surrounded her with support and practical assistance. In early December, as the first snow of winter blanketed the landscape, Beatrice went into labor. Caleb rode for Dr. Wilson while Mrs. Foster stayed by Beatrice's side, her experienced hands providing comfort during the long hours of waiting. The birth was difficult but uncomplicated. As dawn broke over the snow-covered hills, a robust cry announced the arrival of Sarah Elizabeth Garrison, named for both Caleb's and Beatrice's mothers. With tears streaming down his face, Caleb placed his daughter in the cherry wood cradle he had built with such hope and love. She's perfect, he whispered, sitting beside Beatrice on the bed, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed at their miracle. You're perfect, not perfect, Beatrice replied, exhausted but radiant, just blessed. After so much darkness, who would have thought we'd find such light? As Christmas approached, the ranch house filled with visitors bearing gifts and good wishes for the new family. Sheriff Patterson arrived with a hand-carved wooden horse for when the little lady's old enough to appreciate it. Mrs. Foster knitted tiny caps and booties in soft wool. Even Gertrude Walsh came, her usual stiffness melted away as she held the infant with practiced ease. You've built something remarkable here, the older woman said, looking around the warm, welcoming home with its decorations of pine and holly. Not just a house, but a place of healing. Beatrice, watching from her rocking chair near the fire, smiled at the transformation in the woman who had once been her harshest critic. Sometimes the most broken places become the strongest when they heal, she replied. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Caleb and Beatrice celebrated quietly at home, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her cradle. Outside, snow fell in gentle flakes, wrapping the world in silence and beauty. I have something for you, Caleb said, placing a small package in Beatrice's hands. Inside was a miniature replica of their house, exquisitely detailed down to the blue shutters and flower boxes. Turn it over, he urged. On the base, he had carved an inscription. Home is where healing begins. Tears filled Beatrice's eyes as she traced the words with her fingertip. How did you know exactly what I needed when even I didn't know? Because I see you, Caleb replied simply. All of you, your strength and your vulnerability, your joy and your sorrow, and I love every part. As if on cue, Sarah began to fuss in her cradle. Beatrice rose to tend to her, lifting the infant with practiced hands. As she settled back into the rocking chair, Caleb knelt beside them, his face alight with wonder as he watched his daughter nurse. Look what we built together, he murmured, his hand gentle on Beatrice's shoulder. Not just a home, but a family. From mockery to miracle, Beatrice agreed, remembering the cruel whispers about her empty cradle now filled with new life. Who would have thought? I knew, Caleb said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. From the moment I saw you in that cemetery, I knew you were stronger than any sorrow, more resilient than any loss. You just needed someone to believe in you until you could believe in yourself again. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing their home in pristine white. Inside, warmth and laughter filled the rooms that had once stood empty and abandoned. In the cradle built with love and hope, their daughter slept peacefully, the promise of their future embodied in her perfect form. And in Beatrice's heart, where grief had once reigned unchallenged, joy now made its home, not erasing the past, but transforming it into the foundation of a life filled with love, laughter, and the healing power of new beginnings.